The sun was setting behind the low hills when Eli Turner closed the gate to his ranch. The sky burned orange, fading into a deep purple as the wind carried the smell of rain. He wiped his hands on his worn jacket and looked across the wide land he had worked for 20 years. There were fences that needed mending, and the barn roof leaked when it rained, but Eli didn't mind. He had learned to live with the silence, with the broken things that matched his own life. He was a man of few words, quiet and steady. People in town called him the lonely rancher, and maybe they were right. Ever since his wife Clara had passed away 5 years ago, the house had felt empty. He had no children, no one to talk to, except for his old dog Rusty, and the horses that kept him company during the long days. When Eli came into town once a week for supplies, people nodded politely but didn't say much. Some whispered about him when they thought he couldn't hear. "That's Eli Turner," they'd say softly. "He's the one who lost her." Never been the same since. He had grown used to it. The town had its stories, and Eli had his silence. He didn't bother to correct them or explain how much guilt he carried. The guilt of not being able to save Clara when she needed him most. That kind of pain had no words, only quiet regret. That night, the wind grew stronger, carrying dark clouds over the valley. Rain started to fall, first in light drops, then in heavy sheets. Eli hurried to the porch, ready to light the lantern, when he heard something unusual, a faint knocking sound. It was almost lost in the storm, soft but desperate. He turned his head toward the sound again. Knock, knock. Someone was at the door. Eli frowned. No one ever came to his ranch this late, especially not in such weather. He grabbed the lantern and opened the door slowly. The cold wind blew in, carrying rain and the smell of mud. There, standing in the doorway, was a young woman, soaked from head to toe. Her clothes were torn at the edges, her hair clung to her face, and her eyes were wide with fear. She looked like she had run for miles. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Hold me, use me, just get me out of here." Eli froze. For a moment he didn't know what to say. The words didn't make sense to him, but the look on her face said everything. She was terrified, broken, and running from something. He stepped aside without a word and motioned her to come in. She hesitated, then stumbled inside. Her shoes left wet marks on the wooden floor. Eli closed the door behind her and handed her a blanket from the chair. "Sit by the fire," he said quietly. She nodded, wrapping the blanket tightly around her shoulders. Her hands were shaking and her lips were pale from the cold. Eli poured her a cup of coffee and handed it to her. She took it with both hands, trying to stop them from trembling. After a few minutes, she looked up. "Thank you," she said softly. Eli nodded. "Name's Eli Turner," he said. "You're safe here. What's your name?" She hesitated, as if afraid of her own answer. "Grace," she said finally. "My name's Grace." He could tell there was more behind that name. Pain, fear, and a story she didn't want to tell. So he didn't push her. Instead, he sat in the chair across from her and let the fire fill the silence. Hours passed. The rain kept falling. Grace didn't sleep. Every few minutes, she'd glance toward the window, her eyes darting as though expecting someone to appear out of the darkness. Eli noticed, but again he said nothing. He knew what fear looked like. He had seen it before, in his own reflection years ago. When she finally spoke again, her voice was low. "I had to run," she whispered. "I couldn't stay there anymore." Eli didn't ask where there was. He just listened. "They said I didn't matter," she continued, her voice breaking, "that nobody would believe me. But I couldn't take it anymore. I just wanted to feel free, even if it meant walking through the storm." Eli's chest tightened. Whatever she had been through, it had left marks deeper than the ones he could see. He handed her another blanket and said gently, "You don't have to talk about it. You can rest here tonight." Grace looked at him as if she didn't believe kindness still existed. A single tear rolled down her cheek, but she wiped it away quickly. Eli went to check on the horses and gave her space. When he came back, she had fallen asleep by the fire, still wrapped in the blanket. Rusty, his old dog, had quietly laid down beside her as if keeping watch. For the first time in years, Eli felt something stir inside him, a small, forgotten feeling of responsibility, of wanting to protect someone again. The next morning, the rain had stopped. The world outside looked washed clean, but inside the air was heavy with questions. Eli made breakfast, eggs, bread, and coffee, and set a plate for her. Grace thanked him quietly and ate like someone who hadn't had a warm meal in days. When she finished, Eli asked gently, "Where are you from, Grace?" She hesitated, staring down at her cup. "From town," she said softly. "Not far. I worked at the diner for a while, but some people there aren't who they seem to be." Eli didn't need to know more. He could hear the truth between her words. The pain, the fear, the need to escape something cruel. Later that day, when Eli went to the barn, he heard horses approaching from the road. 2 men from town were riding toward his property, talking loudly. He could make out bits of their conversation. "They say she ran away in the storm," one of them said. "Sheriff's been asking around." Eli's stomach tightened. He turned back toward the house and saw Grace peeking through the window, panic flashing across her face. "They're looking for me," she whispered when he came in. "Please, Eli, don't let them take me back." Eli looked into her eyes, tired, frightened, desperate. He thought of all the nights he had blamed himself for not being able to save Clara. Maybe this was his second chance to do something right. "You're safe here," he said firmly. "No one's taking you anywhere unless you want to go." Grace's eyes filled with tears. She nodded slowly, believing him. For the first time since she had arrived, her shoulders relaxed just a little. That night, Eli couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, watching the dark road that led to town. He knew that sooner or later someone would come asking questions, but he didn't care. Something deep inside told him that protecting this girl was the right thing to do. Not because she reminded him of anyone, but because no one deserved to live in fear. As the fire burned low, Grace walked quietly into the room. She stood near the window, her face lit by the faint glow. "I used to think the world was full of good people," she said softly, "but now I don't know anymore." Eli looked at her, his voice steady but kind. "There are still good people, Grace. Sometimes they just live far away from town." For the first time, she smiled, and a small shaky smile, but it was real. Outside, the stars returned to the sky, shining through the last of the storm clouds. Inside that quiet ranch, 2 broken souls, one haunted by the past, the other running from it, found a moment of peace they hadn't known in years. Neither of them said it aloud, but they both felt it. That somehow fate had brought them together not by accident, but by mercy, and as Eli watched the fire fade, he thought to himself that maybe, just maybe, the silence of his ranch was finally beginning to heal something inside both of them. Morning came softly over the ranch, with sunlight spilling through the old wooden windows. Grace was already awake, standing outside with a cup of coffee in her hands. She watched the horses grazing quietly, the sky turning golden above the hills. For the first time in a long while, she felt calm. Eli stepped out onto the porch, still buttoning his shirt. "You're up early," he said. "I couldn't sleep much," Grace replied. "I kept thinking about everything, but it feels different here, peaceful." Eli nodded. "It's quiet out here. That's what I like about it." Grace smiled faintly. "I think I like it too." Days slowly turned into weeks. Grace started helping around the ranch. At first, she just swept the porch or fed Rusty, the old dog, but soon she learned how to saddle a horse and gather eggs from the chicken coop. Eli never asked her about her past. He gave her space, and she filled that silence with small steps toward feeling normal again. The townspeople, however, had begun to talk. It started with whispers at the diner, then at the general store. "Eli Turner's hiding someone out there," they said. "A girl who ran away." Some even claimed she was trouble, saying she had caused problems before she left. When the sheriff came riding up the dusty road one afternoon, Eli knew it was only a matter of time. The sheriff was an older man named Ray Collins, someone Eli had known for years. He was fair but cautious, the kind who always followed the rules. Ray dismounted his horse and tipped his hat. "Morning, Eli." Eli nodded. "Sheriff." Ray looked around the ranch yard before speaking. "Word in town is that you've got someone staying here." "A young woman." Eli crossed his arms. "Maybe I do. Why?" "Because she's been reported missing," the sheriff said carefully. "People are worried. Some say she ran from something bad. Others think she's hiding something herself." Eli's eyes hardened. "She's not hiding anything, Ray. She just needed a place to feel safe." "That's all," Ray sighed. "You know I can't just ignore it. If she's here, I need to talk to her." Eli turned slightly toward the house. Grace was standing by the window, her face pale as she heard every word. He looked back at Ray. "She's scared, Sheriff. Not dangerous, just scared. Give her some time." Ray studied Eli's face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, I'll give you a few days. But Eli, the town's starting to talk. Be careful. You know how people can be. After the sheriff left, Grace came outside, tears forming in her eyes. They'll take me back, won't they? She asked. Eli shook his head. Not unless you want to go. But what if they force you? What if they come here again? Eli placed a firm but gentle hand on her shoulder. Then they'll have to get through me first. Something about the way he said it made her believe him completely. From that day on, Grace tried harder to prove she wasn't a problem. She helped Eli with everything, cleaning the barn, fixing fences, even cooking dinner. In the evenings, they'd sit by the fire, not talking much but sharing quiet company. The house no longer felt empty. One night, as the sun went down, Grace looked at Eli and said softly, You don't even know me, but you've done more for me than anyone ever has. Why? Eli stared at the fire for a moment before answering. Because years ago someone needed me, and I wasn't there for her. I don't want to make that mistake again. Grace didn't ask who he meant. She didn't need to. She could see the sadness in his eyes, the kind that comes from losing something you can never get back. A few days later, trouble came again. A group of men from town rode up to the ranch gate. They weren't the sheriff, just angry townsfolk full of gossip and pride. One of them, a man named Bill Carter, shouted, Eli Turner, we know she's here. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Eli walked out onto the porch, calm and steady. What do you want? Bill pointed toward the house. That girl doesn't belong here. She caused a mess back in town. You're only making it worse by hiding her. She's done nothing wrong, Eli said firmly. Then why'd she run? Another man shouted. Innocent folks don't run. Grace stood inside the house, watching from the window, trembling. She wanted to hide, but something inside her told her not to. She had run enough in her life. Eli stepped down from the porch and stood in front of the men. You don't know what she's been through, he said quietly. And it's none of your business. Bill took a step forward. You think you're better than the rest of us? You're protecting a liar, Turner. You've gone soft. Eli's voice was low but strong. I've gone human, Bill. Maybe you should try it. The words hung in the air like a challenge. For a moment, no one spoke. The men shifted uncomfortably, unsure what to do next. Then the sheriff's voice came from behind them. That's enough, he said firmly, riding up on his horse. Go home, all of you. This isn't your fight. Reluctantly, the men left, muttering under their breath. When they were gone, the sheriff turned to Eli. You're making things hard for yourself, my friend. Eli looked him in the eye. Maybe, but sometimes doing the right thing is supposed to be hard. Ray nodded slowly. I can't argue with that. Weeks passed after that day. The tension in town slowly faded, and people found new things to gossip about. Grace stayed on the ranch, learning more every day. She smiled more often, laughed sometimes, and started to believe that maybe her life wasn't over yet. One evening, she sat with Eli by the porch as the sun dipped behind the hills. The air was warm and the sky painted with colors. She looked at him and said softly, You gave me more than a place to stay. You gave me hope. Eli looked at her with kind eyes. You did the hard part yourself, Grace. You decided to keep going. She shook her head. No, I think we both did. They sat in silence after that, listening to the crickets and the wind moving through the grass. It was a peaceful kind of silence, not lonely, but healing. One morning, months later, Grace received a letter from a friend she hadn't heard from in years. It was about a small job in another town, a new start, far from the whispers of the past. She showed it to Eli, unsure what to do. You should go, he said gently. You've earned your new beginning. Her eyes filled with tears. I don't want to leave you alone. Eli smiled, though it was bittersweet. I'll be fine. This ranch has been quiet a long time. It can handle a little silence again. What matters is that you found your peace. Grace hugged him tightly. I'll never forget what you did for me, she whispered. And I'll never forget what you reminded me of, he said softly. That kindness still matters. On the morning she left, the sky was clear and bright. Rusty barked as Grace packed her small bag. Eli helped her onto the horse and handed her the reins. Take care of yourself, Grace, he said. She nodded, tears in her eyes. You got me out of there, Eli. But more than that, you brought me back to life. He watched her ride away until she disappeared beyond the hills. The ranch felt quiet again, but not empty. The silence now was peaceful, like a long sigh after years of pain. That evening, Eli sat on the porch, the wind cool against his face. He looked out across the land and smiled faintly. Somewhere out there, Grace was starting over. And for the first time in years, Eli felt something he thought he'd lost forever. Peace, simple and real. He whispered softly into the wind, "You made it, kid." And as the sun sank low behind the hills, Eli Turner, the lonely rancher the town once pitied, finally found his own kind of redemption.